So let's get started. Some of you may know, but for those of you that don't, I am Trish DeWald, and I am an advisor to COACT and the principal advisor at Mondo Unlimited. And I'm going to be facilitating today's training, which is an intro to fundraising planning. So for those of you that have access to the training documents that were sent, feel free, download them, follow along, take notes. Both Asteria and I will be doing our best to monitor the chat throughout this session, so feel free to submit questions at any time. Also, just because it helps to ground me a little bit in where folks are coming from, if you could drop your organization's name and a brief description of a specific project that you're in the process of writing a proposal for or hope to eventually sometime soon write a proposal for, that would be helpful. I will do my best to weave those your information into some of the conversation coming up. So at the end of, actually before we get started, by a show of emojis, how many of you have written a proposal before? And if you have, feel free to drop it in the chat what it felt like. I did see earlier that a couple of folks have not yet written a proposal, and that's why you're here, and that is perfectly okay and amazing. Thank you for the hat love. It's really outside my comfort zone. When I purchased this, I was inspired by Carmen Sandiego. I don't know how many of you remember playing that around the world trivia game, but I like to get away. And so here's my Carmen Sandiego inspo. Developing a farm on campus, amazing. Diana's written several grant requests, amazing. Wonderful. Thank you everyone for sharing. Good emojis and thumbs up. All right, so by the time we're done with this training, you should have a really good bird's eye view and cursory understanding of what the proposal writing process is like. And I think it's important as we start this discussion to think about this as a process. It's not just writing a pitch. It includes really important components like planning, research, the writing, obviously, and then the follow-up. So independent of these very specific tasks, the most important part of this process, in my opinion, is building the relationship with the donors and those potential donors. That is a really important aspect of all kinds of fundraising, not just proposal writing. And so the thing to remember here is that you can devote a ton of time and invest a lot of money in this process to produce a really well-written proposal. But if you've skipped some of these steps, if you've ignored the relationship building, for example, your proposal is going to hit a lot differently. It will have a different success rate than it could if you incorporate all the parts of this proposal writing process. So just up here on the screen, this is what you should be able to do by the time we are done together, at least have an understanding of. So what are
Get down. Oops.
Hi, Rosalind. So we're going to get into a little bit more deeply the components of the process. So here we go. You are in the right spot. So before we get into this, I think, this is one of my many repeatable caveats, right? One that you've all heard me say is if you know one funder, you know one funder. The other worthy repeatable mantra that I have is follow the funder's guidelines, right? No matter what we say, no matter what we outline as a process or what is deemed right or correct or best practices, no matter what, follow the funder's guidelines. Okay, so planning is this first step. Grant seeking is super competitive and you need to be really prepared when you're approaching your funders. So as you get started in this process, it's really critical that you give yourself, your organization, your grant writers, your fund development team, enough time to go through each step of this process so that you can end up with a really competitive proposal at the end. once you submit that final proposal to the foundation, they're gonna have their own process for reviewing the many requests that they receive. Some foundations are very transparent about their process and will even publish a rubric for how they're going to be considering your proposal compared to others that they receive. But others don't share that process. So I'm curious to know from the class here, how long do you think the process should realistically take from start to finish? What's been your experience, or how long do you think it should take? Zoom user to everyone, I don't see a name, but yes, Esther will certainly send the hands out with the evaluation. We'll make sure you get that. Trinity, I love your project, a wellness vehicle and healing practitioners for Detroiters. Beautiful, gorgeous. Sharnice, 1 month. Anybody else? How long do you think the process should realistically take from planning through writing and follow-up?
Reggie says 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months. Thank you.
Actually, chat shows.
Chat does show up on the screen.
We trying out our new virtual equipment here.
It's kind of fun. I don't know how many of you are lucky enough to have 2 of me, but here we go. There's lots of Trish, Land, and building grants. Thank you, Rhonda. I mean, the process takes as long as it takes, right? It could easily take 6 to 9 months. It could take longer, hopefully not, right? From the date your proposal is submitted until the date you receive a check. But I like to counsel my teams to be absolutely sure that you have enough time to give yourself on-ramp, planning time, execution time. Plan on not receiving those funds in your account for a year. It was super conservative. It almost never takes 12 months for that to happen. But in thinking about how to plan your runway and plan your projects, I like to err on the side of too long. And so when the funds show up in 30, 60 days, everybody's having a party and we're ready to go. I think also, in addition to setting a realistic timeline, you need to think about what kind of support you need. Do you need Gen Ops? Yes, obviously, and always. Are you funding a specific project or program? Or are you funding something else like equipment or operations? So why do you think this is? What is it about this differentiation in type of funding that's important to consider at this point? Good point, Trinity. Yes, the larger grants can take more time. You know, I've seen small grants also ship out in smaller amount, in a longer amount of time. I think it depends on committee size, board meeting timing for different organizations. It's really like one of those great big, it depends answers. I feel like maybe I could cancel all of our sessions and just be like, the answer is it depends. Budget. Yeah.
Zoom user, can you put your name in the chat for me, please?
It's not me, is it? Am I Zoom user? No, I'm
No,
proactive,
it's
right,
not.
Trish. You know, I think it's often easier for organizations to secure funding for a specific program or project than it is for Gen Ops, and this is something that's been shown across our industry time and again. But one of the reasons for that is that it's easier for us as organizations to make a case for direct impact. Thank you, Taylor. To make a case for direct impacts and outcomes when it's tied to a specific project. It's hard, it's difficult, it takes time and a different sort of brain set to measure how salaries and rent and overhead and all those things we talked about in the budgeting program last time. It's difficult to measure how those are going to benefit the community and not just the organization itself. So I think part of what we have to do as storytellers is get really crafty about how we tell the story about how having a place, how having an educated and dedicated staff and resources do benefit the community, right? And not the organization, because to be frank, none of our organizations exist to benefit us directly, right? It's not the staff, it's not the consulting teams, it's the community for which we're working. So the better we can articulate that in our proposal writing process, the more successful we're going to be. Okay, so thinking about all of this, today we're gonna really focus on preparing for a project proposal. But no, a project proposal in particular, not Gen Ops, but the process is similar. For Gen Ops, instead of focusing on a specific program or project, you're gonna apply all of the same elements that we're gonna be talking about to your organization as a whole. So I just wanna make that differentiator as we're going into this. The process that we're gonna outline is replicable for Gen Ops. It's just easier to talk about this in the frame of a project. Okay, so before you start writing, you're gonna need to know as much as possible about the funder. And research is a really critical step that helps you as an organization, as a partner, potential partner to funders, to be more competitive. This research is gonna help you to know who you're approaching, but more importantly, why. So when we ask funders what the number one reason is for a proposal not being funded, it's almost unequivocally, they say it's because it wasn't the right fit for what they're looking for. Coupled with, and this is another big one, we have finite resources of funding opportunities. So remember, when you submit proposals, just because you're not funded doesn't necessarily mean that it is not right in an organization's sweet spot. It could be exactly what they do, but our foundation partners have finite and limited resources also, and they're always making choices. So the more you can know about your funding partners and the stronger you can build those relationships with them, the higher your potential for success is going to be. So it's really important to, Jenny, thank you for calling that out. Research involves a conversation with the grants officer. If you're comfortable coming off mute, can you talk a little bit about what that feels like to you, what's incorporated in that funder conversation? Because I too believe that that's a critical step, right? And trying to waste anybody's time. Are you comfortable sharing with the class, Jenny, what that feels like, what that conversation might be?
Sorry, guys, I couldn't find the mute button. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's I don't want to discourage anybody. We're in a different situation than I'm sure most people are. We are fairly new grassroots organization, nonprofit for sure, 501c certified. But because we're new, our funding history has presented a problem for us. We don't have an extensive funding history. And so our conversations with grant officers have been, we like your program, it looks really good, but basically go find somebody else to fund you first and then come back to us. So that's unfortunate, but the conversation, we always get something out of it. You know, we dig a little bit deeper. We don't let the initial no be our final, takeaway. We always dig a little bit deeper. I actually had a conversation with a grants officer, and I'll make this very quick, who I did the research and I saw that they had funded a number of organizations in our area, like Alternative for Girls, and our program very much aligns with some of what Alternative for Girls does. So I sent in an initial request, got an initial no. I called the grants officer and said, well, we see that you funded other organizations in the area. Maybe you can shed some light onto why our program is so different. Why would you initially reject us? And she was very, very candid with me, and I really, really appreciate it. She was like, your funding history, you don't have a history that shows if we give you this money, what you'll do with it. We don't want to take the risk. And I said, well, we really are dedicated to doing the programming in this area. Can I reach out back to you maybe in a couple of years when we do have that established funding history and we can show how we've spent the money and done programming? She said, absolutely do that. So, if you can kind of continue to dig and mine through the conversation, you can really get some great feedback despite an initial no.
I'm really grateful that you shared that, Jenny. I think especially for our startup organizations, it can really feel like you're just pushing that stone up the hill, right? And it's a chicken or egg situation, right? I can't get funding if I don't have funding. Like what? That feels mind-boggling. I always encourage, and I probably encourage you to do the same, right? Is figure out if there are organizations with whom your organization can partner to help build some of that funding history. Are there opportunities to seek sponsorships from local organizations that may help to build up your funding history outside of just traditional philanthropy. Also, individual gifts can certainly be helpful, and they can show foundation partners that that you are investment worthy, that you are good stewards of the funds. I know your organization in particular has a great track record of being good stewards of resources. And I think, you know, while there are lots of funders that are telling you no, I really appreciate that that's not a no forever in your mind. I think that's really important to remember. But for all kinds of organizations, not now is how I like to interpret a no, but also getting curious with our funders about why not now, and if not now, then when. So it's a slog, especially in the early years, but the strong will prevail, even when it's hard. We get really good at rejection in this space. So it just builds a little bit thicker skin, whether we want it or not. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. I think also finding the right match, an important part of finding the right match is to be able to understand not only what's in it for your organization, but also what's in it for the funder. I try really hard to remember that our funding partners have very specific goals and objectives too. They have boards to whom they answer, they have founders to whom they answer. And our grant proposals should really be viewed as a win-win proposition. And I want to be very clear, I don't mean a quid pro quo, but I mean win-win. So mutually beneficial relationships, I think, when both organizations, both parties get something out of this relationship. And that you can really only do that when you understand, you identify what the funder cares about and what they're most interested in funding. The foundation directory that we've introduced a little bit in some previous sessions and will always have access to through COACT. Using the foundation directory online will help you to identify funders who give to your field of interest, to give to your specific geography, and the kind of support that you're looking for. And while we've covered how to use foundation directory really briefly in previous classes, I know that COACT will be announcing some open office hours for using this tool, so keep an eye out for that announcement, unless Asteria is announcing it right now.
Yes, I can announce it
Okay.
right now. Our first, we'll be having our first drop-in work day, which will be May 25th, and it will be from the hours, I believe, 9 to 5. You are allowed to come in and drop in, just use the office space to do some work, or if you want to come in and use the foundation directory online, you'll be able to do that as well. If you go to our website, you have to actually sign up, to come in, so we'll know how many people are coming into the office space. You can sign up on our website, and I believe Trish dropped our website in the chat. So that'll be it. So hopefully we'll see some of you here utilizing that tool.
And I plan on being around that day too, so my brain will be available for the picking. Happy to go on some rabbit hole digging expeditions with you and the foundation directory.
And the entire staff will be here from COACT to answer any questions about our grants programs that we currently have running, and we've taken applications, I believe, for one right now. So you might want to come in and pick our staff's head about the different programs that we have available as well.
Thank you. Okay, so in addition to this research, it's important to remember the why as much as the who once you've identified the list of potential prospects, because you're going to need to be convincing them that your program, that your project is going to help achieve their goals as well as your own. So it's just a frame of reference that I like to go into my proposal writing process with. Not only how can I serve my community, but how can I help my foundation partners, my giving partners achieve their goals and objectives as well. So next we're going to talk a little bit about writing the proposal and then how to follow up with the funder. And again, just because I have to say it and it's on the slide, always follow the funder's guidelines. No matter what I say, follow the guidelines. Yeah, so many funders, I think all that I've encountered recently in the past 5 years have moved to an online format. The Council for Michigan Foundations has created and published a common grant application form for organizations that haven't yet submitted a grant and are looking to get ready and stay ready. I like to suggest starting with pretending that you're applying for a grant by using their template as a guide. It just helps to, I mean, it's not going to mirror every funder's process, but they ask for many of the same components that funders across the board are going to be looking for. Looking at this and getting ready doesn't guarantee that you're going to have every funder's every single box checked. But the kinds of questions that they're going to ask will be very similar. So it's important to note also that some funders won't have a specific format at all. They may just ask you to provide a list of answers to questions that they ask. If they don't have a specific format, the link that I just dropped in there for CMF, this format and structure will just give you really good benchmarks and roadmap for getting ready for those funder conversations. So use this as an opportunity to put together a boilerplate proposal. For those of you that haven't submitted applications before, this is a really good practice so that inevitably when a funder says, yeah, we got some money and we need your proposal in our hands in the next, 36 hours, you don't have to scramble to find it. You don't have to think about how to wordsmith some of these answers. You'll be ready. You'll be 80% of the way there. It's really, really difficult to write and edit your proposal in limited space of time, but also many of our funding partners will limit character count or word counts. It's really important to pay attention to those. Many of them will cut you off before you get there. But if you have answers already crafted in advance, it's easier to edit a document for clarity or brevity than it is to start from a blank sheet of paper. Also, and this is unfortunately from real lived experience, while most funding applications do offer a save and return to it later, not all of them do. So when you are working in an online application, I think it's really good practice to write your answer, like to find the questions in advance, hopefully you can do that. Write your answers in a separate document outside of the online portal and then copy and paste. This gives you a couple of different opportunities. One, to not throw your computer out the window when you lose everything in the online format, but also you can utilize Grammarly to check to make sure that you're using proper grammar. You can run spell check in ways that you can't always do through an online submission. So just don't be a Trish in that way. Get your proposals written before you submit them online. Even with this template, right, the template either from the funder or from the Council of Michigan Foundations, if you can consider your proposal like a job application or a resume for your organization, you're going to want to tailor it every single time, right? Just because you put together your proposal pitch, your boilerplate proposal pitch, your case for investment, or your case for support, you absolutely have to tailor it to meet the funder's guidelines, but more critically, their interests, right? This boilerplate gives you a head start. It should live in your virtual document drawer. It should be accessible to your team so that as your projects are updated, as your goals and objectives change, they have a place from which to start. I'm not even going to ask who has had their online submissions disappear in the process because it's just painful. Haven't done it lately, but ooh, that'll stick with you. Okay, so typical proposal elements. Here you're going to see these are basic elements of a proposal. The executive summary, it's a narrative, right? This is, I'm not going to say it's the largest part, but it's a really important part because if our program officers or whoever's part of the selection committee or the review committee only reads one thing, you got to make sure you get them hooked in this part. So this is the narrative that's going to include your needs statement, a quick description of the project, the history of your organization, and the conclusion, which is why should they care and what do you need them to do. You're also going to need to include a budget with this proposal and supporting materials. We did last time we were together, I think it was the last session, we did an intro to how to prepare a project budget. I don't think it's on COAC's virtual library yet, but it will be within the next month or so. But that budgeting process, preparing that budget is a really important part of your proposal. And it's important to remember as we're writing our proposals that the budget, what you're asking for, needs to be articulated in the proposal also. So just have a look back at that, or feel free to pop in with questions about the budget relationship to your proposal writing. Okay, so the $1 million question, what do funders really want to know? Right, so our goal with writing an effective proposal is to get the funding from our partners. And in order to do this, we have to write really compelling stories. We have to share our case for support, our case for investment. And a grant, I like to think of it as investment, right? And with any investment, our funders are looking for a high rate of return with a low risk. So I guess, what do you think that means? What does that mean to each of you? High rate of return with low risk. Right, they're not looking for, 12% return on their dollars because we're not giving them back money. What does that mean to you? Rate of return with low risk.
I can pop in. I think what it means is just they want to trust that those they give money to can actually implement what they state in the proposal, and they can reflect the impact of the money that was given to them as well. Yeah, I would there.
Beautiful. I think that is exactly articulate and perfect. Right, Chris. So they want to see that the money will be used and benefit the community. They want to know that we're capable partners, right? And we're going to do it as effectively and as efficiently as we can. So thinking about that framing that's been so beautifully articulated, here's some questions I think that most funders, maybe all funders, really want to know the answers to. I'm still on the previous one. It's okay, you just can't see my notes. What need are we addressing? What are we trying to achieve? How are we going to make this happen? What's our strategy? Why are you the best organization to do this work? Why is your team best equipped to do this work? And oftentimes one of the harder ones to articulate is how is this project going to sustain itself in the long run? So the next few slides, we're going to look at each of these questions individually. So first off, what specific need are we addressing? This tells the reader, the grant review committee, what the problem is that you're trying to solve for and why they should give any cares at all. So it's not enough just to state the problem. You're going to have to back it up with supporting facts and statistics. And it's really important at this point to reiterate that you're double checking your facts and stats. Make sure that they're relevant to the specific population and the community that we're serving, and that it fits the size and scope of your solution, right? So if you're serving people who are experiencing homelessness, you're probably not going to state that we're going to house all 40,000 people that require housing in a specific region, right? That is not likely your goal, but it can be really important and impactful to frame the problem in the more global context. Also, cite your sources, right? I can say something that sounds super factual, trust, but also verify. We'll see stats all over the place. It's going to be enticing to copy and paste, but really make sure that your information is coming from a reliable source. We can count and slice and dice things. We can state things in very different ways. Just make sure that you're using reliable sources and that you're backing it up. Also, and this is one of the nuances of communication for our sector in general, but in particular with our proposals, we want to make sure that no matter how serious the problem is, right, we're dealing with big issues, with serious problems. Don't paint a grim picture, right? So we don't want anybody to feel hopeless. We don't want it to feel like a deficit mentality. We don't want to come at our work from a scarcity mindset, whether it's in resources or in problem solving. So it's really important to know or to share our stories from a position of success. But also be ready to explain how your organization's specific solution is addressing the size and scale of the need that you're addressing. So, right, going back to the homelessness example, you're not necessarily going to serve everybody who's experiencing the need for housing, but how are you serving very specifically the 30 women in your care? And you can use that funnel approach, right? The big problem, the medium problem, and how specifically my organization and my team is dealing with it. All right, so what are we trying to achieve? That's the tip of the iceberg for sure.
Trish, I have a quick question about citing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious based on your experience, because I've written proposals and I'll do like an in-text citation after like, a piece of evidence. And so how my organization is set up, we have a fiduciary who like offers like they'll review our grant proposals or whatever. So when I submitted a proposal that had that, feedback was not to include that within the text. So I'm curious, like, should I not do that, or should I just have like a page of references after the proposal? I'm curious kind of what you suggest.
So I suggest having all of the citations. Okay, first of all, I suggest do what the funder asks you to do. But in addition to that, when you write your proposal, keep the citations for yourself, for sure. Keep that list of where you're finding the information, be able to reference it. Typically, when I'm submitting proposals, I'm not making citations. Like, they are looking at me as the expert in my problem and in the challenge and in the solutions that I'm bringing. So when I say, here's the problem and here are the solutions and here's how this is verified, I don't necessarily need to cite it specifically in my proposals. But I like to have my backup. So in my working documents, I'll always keep the information about where I'm getting my sources, my source information. So keep your citations. They don't necessarily have to be included in the proposal. Oftentimes it gets a little mucky for our funders to look at, following along with the footnotes or following along with the in-source citations. If there's one that you think is really, really amazing and awesome or brand new, feel free to include it. The chances are good that it's not going to be required in your particular proposals. Thank you for elevating that.
Yes, thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay, so the project description is likely going to be the most detailed, the longest section of your proposal. And this is where you describe exactly how you plan to address this issue that you're raising in the needs section. And you're going to be looking to do this with very measurable outcomes. Okay, and here's my caveat for this part, right? Goals, objectives, and outcomes, you're going to hear me use those words interchangeably. There are nuances to each of them, but we're going to just use them globally right now, goals, objectives, and outcomes, because getting into the nuances are very specific. Different funders will define them differently. But sort of for the purposes of this introductory class, we're going to use them a little bit interchangeably. We're going to use goals as broad general statements of what you plan to accomplish, and the objectives we're going to be thinking about as specific and measurable within a realistic time frame. It's easy to think about these with the SMART acronym, the specific, measurable, achievable, and realistic within a specific time frame, SMART, to help you think about your goals and think about those objectives. You should also use this part of the proposal to discuss whether the issue is currently being addressed at all. If so, how is your solution, how is your organization positioned to approach it differently? We know that there's plenty of room in our ecosystem for multiple solutions to similar or the same problems or opportunities. There are different ways to serve participants. There are different opportunities for our clients to receive our services. Similarly, there's also a tremendous amount of room for collaboration in our sector. So knowing our landscape is important. And I like to encourage new organizations, but also organizations that have been doing this work for a really long time, is to do a competitive landscape analysis. And that sounds really fancy, but just know who else is doing stuff like what you're doing in the community. And also, I don't mean competition as like adversarial, me versus you, because there's plenty of room, there's plenty of space in our community to do work, but you have to be aware of who else is working in your space, how you complement one another, how you can work together, how you can support one another. But when we're writing proposals, how to differentiate our organization and our program from those that may have been doing it for decades, or those that are brand new to the space as well. Okay, so the next part is knowing what your strategies are for making it happen. The project description should include the details of the particular methods that you're going to be using to implement your project. What are you going to do? How are you going to get there? This section of the proposal process is the opportunity to really put together your detailed plan of action that includes components like who, what, where, when, how, who's going to be doing it, what are we going to be measuring, where we're going to happen, or where the work is going to happen, and how and when, right? So when we put together that thought out description, we should also include, we have the opportunity to include a timetable. I said we should. Sometimes there's a timeline component to this. Some very specifically call out timelines for your program. If they don't, it's still really important to include a plan, right? That by when is what we're going to be doing. When we get the funding, 3 months after we get the funding, here's what we'll do. 6 months after, here's what's going to happen. And by the end of 18 months or 24 months or 5 years, here's where we plan to be. Here's what we think will happen with your investment. I think it's also a really good opportunity to emphasize and call out any of those collaborations or partnerships that you have with other organizations. To Jenny's point earlier, right, investors like to see organizations who are working together, who are collaborating or working in collective and innovative and really interesting ways, rather than being duplicative of efforts that are already happening. And when we're doing this, right, talking about who we're collaborating with and who our partners are, it's also really helpful to know who else the funders are supporting in this work. Oftentimes the funders will publish, they do publish who they give to, how much they give to. They don't always share the details of the projects and the programs that they're funding, but looking at who else is being funded by particular funders gives you really good clues into the kind of programs and projects that they'll be supporting. If you think that your project, and this is really important, I think, if you are building a new program or a new project that you think is replicable, either in other neighborhoods, other cities, other regions, other states across the globe, I think it's really important to include that information. It'll help to demonstrate to the funding partners that your organization is poised to be a model, that you're interested in using your project as a potential pilot, but more critically, and I think this is really important, that funding partners will see your project as long-lasting and far-reaching, right? If it's not just for your concentric, your immediate circle, if they can use it as a model to increase their impact, I think that's a really, really beautiful win. I see a red mark here. Can you repeat that in a different way? Sorry, I didn't understand. Yeah, so if you're doing a project in your community and, for example, you're sharing an innovative way to improve literacy, right? If there are specific things that you can do as an organization to show that when you pair specific literacy opportunities with trauma-informed approaches, and if this is new and unique, how can your funding partners or other organizations use your learnings, use your project or program as a model or an example to replicate in other cities, other neighborhoods, other regions, with other populations. It can be really compelling for a funder to invest in that kind of a project. Did that answer your question? Add clarity, or did I just confuse the issue a little bit more? Excellent. They do want to see how the money will be used to benefit the community. Grateful that I'm making sense. I'm not all that well caffeinated just yet, so sometimes I'm dubious. Okay, so how do you know if you're successful? Measurements and evaluation are critical to not only the planning part of the process, but also important things that our funders are going to want to know, right? So your evaluation process, if you can articulate it and outline it for them, it's going to show our funders that you know how to track whether you're achieving your goals and objectives. It's also important for you as nonprofit partners, as executive directors, to measure your own success, your own overall impact, and continue to prove and iterate, to think about, to change how it is you're making a difference. And there are gazillions of ways to evaluate. What you choose depends on lots of different factors, but there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Are your goals and objectives, right? Are you doing what you set out to do? Once you've identified your specific, remember your SMART goals and objectives, then you can identify the key indicators for success based on those goals. Did I achieve something specific? Did I achieve the measurements that I set out? Did I do it in the right timeline, right? So some things are easier to measure than others, right? How many people a food bank serves, right? It's pretty cut and dry. How you measure the success of people served at a food bank versus the success of a mentoring program for teenage girls, right? It's a little bit trickier. So you should be sure to use both quantitative and qualitative measures. So for example, if our goal is to raise the self-esteem of teenage girls, how could we measure our organization's success or impact? How do we do that? What are some ways that we could do this? So either qualitative or quantitative. Pre and post survey, right? What are some of the things, Taylor, that we would be looking to measure in that pre and post survey? For anybody, not just Taylor. I don't want to call you a Taylor.
Really just to find out in that scenario, how the girls identify if they feel like they've actually had better self-esteem before and after. You can identify what self-esteem is. There's a whole bunch of ways on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Community participation too. Student testimonials about program experience, really beautiful qualitative way. Quantitative, I always find those a little bit trickier for me personally to identify because I just think in qualitative ways often. But for this particular example, maybe we could look at decrease in detentions or tardinesses or absences from school. Maybe they're getting higher grades or higher test scores. All of those things can be tracked and measured numerically. Other ways would be those stories that we're talking about, right? Quotes from teachers, parents, maybe they're sharing their own journals or we're tracking their peer group discussions, right? There are different ways that we can do it, but you get the idea that we want to make sure that we're thinking about how to measure the success of what we're doing. And then once you've identified what you're going to measure, you have to come up with and be able to articulate how you're collecting that data and how you're going to analyze your activities. Drop a couple of things, a couple of resources in the chat that you can come back to. Oops. Now they're bolded. I think that's 3 different links there. Okay, so at some point in your proposal, you're going to have to give the reviewer information about your organization as a whole. And this is going to be where you talk about not only your mission and your organization's history, the program services, accomplishments, your reputation, visibility in the community, your track record, right? Like, why are you best positioned for this investment? Our foundation partners are going to be looking for that sense of investability. They're going to be looking for you to show not just that you've got a great idea on how to make a difference, but that you have a track record of making a difference. They're going to be looking for that social proof or that actual proof that you are best positioned for doing this. So if your organization is having difficulty in getting foundation support, you might want to consider shifting your fundraising strategy. You're going to need it. There's that whole river that we've seen before, right? Our corporate support, our individual support, our foundation support. But know that you've got to attack this elephant from lots of different angles. And lean into your personal reputation, your organization's reputation, as you're making the case that you are investment ready and worthy. Another important piece that our foundation partners want to see is how's this project going to sustain itself in the long run. Very few funders want to be the only one. Very few funders want to be the first in, as we've already heard from some colleagues on here. No foundation is likely going to fund you forever. And your organization cannot and should not exist on grant support alone. So when you think about your fundraising strategy, you have to think through not only how your organization is going to support itself now through this project, through one proposal, but in the long run. So what is your business plan? What will you be doing? How will your organization support itself without grant funding? Are there earned revenue models that you should be exploring? But this is just really important to be thinking about your diverse streams of revenue in that beautiful river. So the next slide is really just a plug for candid profiles. Once a funder reads your proposal and gets some sort of interest and awareness of funding your work, the next step that they're likely going to take is do their due diligence to figure out if your organization is as credible as you say it is. Are you fiscally stable? Do you have a history of impact? And sometimes when they're doing this due diligence, they're going to look for your organization's candid profile. So this is my reminder to you, go look for your candid profile, make sure that you have seen it, that you can update it, that you claim it, and use that as a tool to really build the awareness and credibility of your organization and their online presence. There are different seals of transparency that you can earn. I'm going to skip that for now. We're going to be, I'm on the next slide, I think.
Okay.
Oh, no, the next one even from that. Become certified, get your transparency, your seal of transparency. It's free, it's good practice, gets you ready for funding. There are resources through Candid, through GuideStar to help you claim your profile and how to earn your seal. We are going to be hosting a Go for the Gold session, the next session actually, to talk about how to claim your seal or claim your GuideStar profile and get ready. But that's just that. I could obviously spend hours talking about this. I love the proposal writing process. It is such an important part of our fund development process. It's kind of like where the rubber meets the road, right? It's after you've gotten ready, it's where you actually get to start putting it into practice. But I do want to leave a few minutes for questions before we go. So with that, I'm going to shut my mouth and see if I can answer any burning questions in the next several minutes.
Hi, I will drop in. I don't have a question, but I did actually want to share a grant opportunity through just, I think what folks kind of express in the space is real, like, especially when we're smaller grassroots orgs, it can be very hard to get our foot in the door with philanthropic spaces. So with that, I wanted to just bring attention towards folks at the Roots that are really trying to transform the way that giving occurs. So I'm a member of the Transforming Power Fund, which is based in Detroit. And we recently just dropped an RFP for our capacity building grants. These grants are specifically for folks that are literally trying to get their foot in the door, or really trying to build capacity to increase their impact in community. So I will drop the link in the chat. There will also be 2 upcoming info sessions for folks that are curious and applying. One is taking place tomorrow, and I think one is like the following week. So if folks are interested in that, I can drop my email and I can send you the link to the meeting. But it just dropped. I believe the app is due at the end of the month, but it also really isn't like that hard of a proposal. So I just, really thank y'all for offering this training, because I think it's just very real. And yeah, I just dropped in 2 links. So one's a direct link to the proposal, and then the other link is to the community table, which is like what I'm on. So if you just want to learn more about the Transforming Power Fund and like what we're trying to do, that's available to you.
Thank you for that. Is there any restrictions to the size of organization or budget that we should know about?
So I believe the cap that we put our budgets no larger than 250,000. Kind of recognizing that both, some folks aren't there yet, but then also some grassroots organizations do exist within that realm, but then it also still is a struggle, or sometimes that amount isn't necessarily enough to uplift the work that they're trying to do in community. So yeah, I believe that is the cap, but in the grant guidelines document, it explains all those things.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I got a question, Trish and Trinity.
Yes.
So what I'm noticing is when the grants are coming forward for RFPs, the exclusionary process is you have to live in Detroit, Hamtramck, or Highland Park, which forgets about the other smaller Black communities that surround Detroit, Hamtramck, and Highland Park, such as Dearborn. I am in Dearborn, and the majority of my work is in Dearborn, and we have a population of 5,000 Black people that really have had no intentional centering on uplifting and building capacity in programming. And so, Trinity, your grant is phenomenal. However, it excludes me. So I just ask that for anybody who's on here that's creating grants, that you take what I'm saying into consideration, so that the smaller populations of Black communities that are underrepresented and being excluded from all of this money coming down be now included. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
That goes back to
Zubria.
what Trish, I think that goes back to what Trish said initially. When you go out for a grant, you have to do your research and you have to follow the guidelines of that grantor. Not every dollar is going to be meant for you. I think earlier this year, we were so excited for the KIPD grant that was coming out, that was funding, in Detroit and whatever. And when we got on the call, we did our research, we knew about KIP before what they are. We got on the call, I'm just going to say this between us funders. You can tell what I say to whomever you like, I don't care. But when we got on the call with KIPD folk, they were bragging, so heavily that, oh, our grant is so competitive. We're so competitive. We're only going to fund about 4 funders. They were bragging about that out of 100 or so local organizations that were applying for that. And that was something they were hanging their hat on. And I got off the call. I was like, only 4 out of all the resources you all have and all of the people that are applying, that's what you think you should be talking about and bragging about? I got off the call with that comment, because that money is not for me. You've already told me that I'm pretty much excluded. So whenever, there's a situation like that with grants, going back to what Trish said, if the funders' priorities are such and such and such and such, that's just what they are. And you got to realize that not every dollar is going to be meant for your organization.
And
Jenny,
that's hard. I think it's important to, as we are transforming power, right? The power dynamics within our sector are real and they're they're grounded in a whole lot of stuff that could be lots of sessions for us, right? But there is a tremendous power in saying no. There's also a real power in circling back with our funding partners to say, here's why we opted to say no. There's an important part of this that is, you know, aligns with values, aligns with objectives, independent of I need the money and you got the money, right? Like it is, it's hard. It's really difficult, but yes, not all money is for us. Sometimes even when it is for us, we still don't get it, and it's hard. It's hard. It's just hard. Don't be deterred. Keep on after it. And as you're looking for funding through the foundation directory online, we can narrow it in based on geography, right? So we can find funders that give in specific geography and exclude those that do not. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give to you, but that's a tool that we have. There's a hand.
So, Trish, you make a very good point. And in regards to the comment that Jen had said, in full transparency, I was raised in Detroit, and to see how it's so much money that from appearance wise, that's going to fund nonprofits. However, when you get behind the curtain and you see still systemic barriers that are preventing us, because let's be honest, a lot of Black people knew nothing about how to build out a nonprofit 3 or 5 years ago, right? That's my perspective. And now, you know, this training is now available, but then another systemic issue is well, you gotta have this, you gotta have that. So I just say, like, as COAC is intentionally leading this space, because I was there when it started, you know, that this is presented to the funders that you're bringing to the table, such as the Wells Fund, the KDP, Kresge, all of the people that are now looking to you to get the information out to people like us. So thank you.
Well, I know my hand been up for a while, so I'm just gonna jump right in. My name is Rosalind Walker. I'm from People's Water Board Coalition, and the few things that the young ladies have been saying is very true, and I'm glad that you have this program. And I stepped in this meeting for Sylvia, which she's over People's Water Board Coalition, and we were writing a grant for the KIP D, and we've been writing and we've been, you know, trying to get it, like you say, don't stop, keep going. So, you know, all of this information is really, really good for, you know, my organization to work on, you know, so I've been taking a lot of notes, and I just want to be able to go back in the chat and be able to get everything for her, because she had to be in another meeting and she couldn't be in this meeting. So thank you guys. And, you know, everybody, you know, just like she was saying about the community, you have a whole lot of communities and districts that's left out. You know, I call them to the unforgotten neighborhoods. You know, when you ride through and you see stuff that look terrible, like where I live in District 4 on the east side of Detroit, which is broke up in so many ways to where you look at it like, how is District 4 a part of this? And how is a District 3 a part of this when I live in the 48224 zip code? When my mother's zip code is 48213, she's a part of my district too, but they're not doing anything in my district. So now we searching and reaching out for these grants, and it's so hard to get, you know. So I understand what everyone is saying, and thank you for this program.
Thank you. It's an honor to be at the table with so many folks doing this work. Never enough resources, but hopefully COAC can continue to support you in your endeavors. We will continue to be a voice for the sector, and the more you share with us, the better we can do. The more we can be advocates and partners and catalysts in helping to resource all of you and what it is you're doing. And, you know, we're new, we're learning, we're growing, and we're working to get it right. But you being here, sharing your thoughts, sharing your experiences is an important part of that process. So thank you. Wisteria is going to share a survey with everybody who is here. And yes, Transforming Power Fund, thank you. I'm going to collect, I don't know if you can copy the chat, Wisteria, to make sure we got everybody, but I think
I can get a copy of it.
without further ado, we're gonna sign off, but thank you for sharing space with tremendous gratitude. I appreciate you.